Okay, so this is not a Where's Kate Middleton podcast. This is not even a look at all these conspiracy theories about Kate Middleton podcast. Today's episode is about something bigger. It's about how one photo from the royal family has revealed a big question. Today on the podcast, do we even share the same reality anymore? I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This is Commotion. It is so rare that you get a story or a single image that kind of perfectly captures the absurdity of the moment that we're living in, this moment when it's kind of hard to tell what is real and what's not. But this week, we got that, right? We got this photo of Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, and her kids. And then a few days later, the image was then pulled from news organizations because that photo had been manipulated. The talk about this photo has been inescapable. I was at a restaurant last night and like 4 different tables around me were talking about this photo. So today on the podcast, we want to zoom out and talk about the photo, but also the photo as a doorway to this larger idea, why it is proof that the concept of truth itself is in trouble. Charlie Warzel wrote about this in The Atlantic. His piece is called Kate Middleton and the End of Shared Reality. Here's what he had to say about the picture.
It's an amazing document to show what it's like to live on an internet and in a world where you can kind of choose your own adventure, right? Where like there is there's a sort of a text, and then there's like all this stuff around it, and you can kind of just like pull and pick what you want from it and try to, fit it to a narrative or a bias that you already have or something like that. Or even just like be kind of dramatic and chaotic and say to yourself, like, okay, you know what? I don't really care what's happening here. I just want to have some fun, and I want to, like make my own memes, do my own thing. And like this image, like there's been this whole saga of, where is Kate Middleton? Like, is she healthy? Is she okay? Is the family okay? Is there a conspiracy? Whatever. It's been going on for months now. Yeah. And like, we still quote, like technically, there are no more concrete answers now.
We have fewer answers
in January. Yeah. And there's now more confusion and more people who are like, what is really going on? And so I think that that's just like the fact that this piece of proof, right? Like this was a PR move to give some concrete evidence to like quell the conspiracy crowd. And all it did was like pour gasoline on that fire. Yeah. I think that's like all of it together really helps represent this notion that like no one can really control the narrative anymore.
Yeah. What makes this story so ripe, for people to sort of project on it, do you think?
I think that there are 2 main elements. And the first element is that conspiracy theories in general and like big sort of viral conspiratorial style moments, especially online, they work best with like big institutions, like the older the better, like a lot of power, like a lot of control. Yeah, the monarchy, like the Catholic Church, or the quote unquote the deep state, like the government, right? Like these things that are institutions that are seen as powerful, that are seen as, there's this feeling, this like, supposition by everyone that there are skeletons in some closet somewhere, we don't know where, like, and they're trying to sort of, manipulate reality. So first you have this institution, right? And you have, as our former colleague, Ellie Hall, who used to report on the Royals at BuzzFeed, has said repeatedly over the past week, there's this declining trust in a lot of institutions, and especially in the monarchy, the stuff that happened, with Harry and Meghan, a long line of people sort of feeling like, they're losing their power a little bit. And so that is great. And for conspiracy theories, it's like a very rich, fertile soil for that. The second is that we're in this era that is just kind of beginning to get really good of synthetic media, right? Like we've had things like Photoshop before. Those things are really, it's been around for 30 years. People doctor photos all the time. But now you have, with the influence and introduction of generative AI, you have this, it's really like an opening of plausibility, right? Like maybe anything can be doctored. And have you seen these tools? They're really good. So like maybe Kate didn't even have to sit down for that photo. So maybe it's not only even photoshopped, maybe it's, so you have this like opening of potential and plausibility. And those two things kind of colliding are, again, it's like the perfect conditions for this stuff to fester. And I think that's, why we're seeing this like really take hold.
So this story matters because there's a real person, there's a real human being in the center of all of this, who may be really suffering. I hope that she's okay. But also there's this kind of, it scales up, and it scales up kind of quickly, right? Like the future of a democratic country, does not depend on the veracity of this specific image, but we are just a few months away from an election in your country, in the United States. We're like a year and a half away from an election in this country, in Canada. So there are consequences to whether we can trust a photo, whether we can trust an image or not. How does this bode for the elections, whether here in Canada or in the United States or anywhere else, do you think?
I think it's tough to say, right? Because the way that these things, the way that this generative AI and these like the deep fakes and all this stuff works, at least to my mind, is it's not just a one-to-one, like now no one believes anything that they see. There's definitely that like that era of, or that aura rather of anything is possible, right?
Yeah.
But I think that what's really, you need that second part, that sort of, either that deep state kind of thing, or that like that intrigue, that world, that extended cinematic universe with which to build on, that like you can root like a theory, because there has to be, some mystery and things like that. So a great example of this is one of the first big generative AI, little like dust up scandals of where, in the post-truth world, was people using this generative AI image tool, Midjourney, to create photos of Donald Trump getting arrested, right? Like, and it was like these really gauzy style, like over stylized photos of him being like dragged by SWAT teams, like in the street, and
God.
like Melania Trump crying and stuff like that. And they were pretty hyper realistic images. Nobody fell for them, right? Because it's like, it's very, instead, good conspiracy theories ask you to prove a negative, right?
Right.
The moon landing happened. Prove it. Right. It's like, Whereas this is, if Donald Trump was running through the streets being chased by cops, you'd be seeing that everywhere. Right. Like every cable news channel, you and I, we'd all just be locked into that. You'd push notifications on your phone. And so that's like a really difficult thing to believe.
But this one
is something where there is that proving a negative, that plausibility. Another great fake that everyone fell for was, I don't know if you saw it, it was like last March, where they had the Pope
like puffer jacket. Yeah. I remember that one. Yeah.
People fell for that because it wasn't like this huge, massive, like, it was not going to like lead every cable news show, right? Instead, you just kind of have, like, it's something you can scroll through quickly and whatever. So, and that's also, the Catholic Church, old institution, a lot of, like people have a lot of feelings baked in. Anyway, so I think that's a long-winded way of saying, I don't know. A lot of this really depends on the context, right? Like who is going to be good enough to, find a moment where they can manipulate it. What I will say is, like, I think most people now have this, this thing in the back of their minds at all times that is saying, there's this great line from this book that this journalist wrote about post-Soviet Russia, and it's called "Nothing is True and Everything is Possible," and it's about sort of like the degradation of culture and corruption and propaganda. Yeah. And I think that's like the perfect line for to describe our moment now, where we look at things like this photo, like like any of the conspiracy theories that we are constantly seeing online, and the notion is like, well, I don't know what happened. Nothing feels true. Yeah. And everything's on the table, right? Like Kate Middleton might be perfectly happy, healthy, normal, and just recovering like a normal person. And we're all, out of our minds coming up with these theories. Or there could be something going on that has sort of triggered our spidey senses. And so I think that's really, if there's a way that I could describe, what we're wading into in this election cycle, I would say it's that sort of sneaking, sensation of nothing is true, everything's possible.
Okay, so you say we're currently living in an era where we cannot trust anything we don't see with our own eyes, and you describe this post-truth universe as very mundane, not like some catastrophic event that shocks us all into recognition. What is it going to take? What is it going to take for us to come to terms with what all of this means?
I think it's time, honestly. I think it's just more than anything else, there's a sense of the most boring answer always is media literacy, and I'm not saying we need to teach it or anything, but I think right now these things are so new that we don't know what they look like. We don't know what we're going to confront. I think about this all the time. I write about the internet and the way that it's changes everything, often for the worse, and kind of the weirding of politics, of culture, of everything, right?
Yeah.
And I think of it as anytime you pose a problem, people say what's the solution, right? And I think the solution is always time. If you look historically, right? The invention of the printing press. After that, you have hundreds of years of just upheaval, right? Because ideas are spreading in interesting ways, and the people who used to control the flow of information no longer do. And there's sort of this influx of stuff for people to latch onto and build belief systems around, or to upend their beliefs and to get them mad and get them prejudiced and whatever, right? Everything. I really think that's a similar thing with the internet. Now, our timeline is going to be compressed, right? But when you go back historically and you look at the sort of the impact of these civilizational kind of foundational technologies on society, it's this long runway where we figure out all the norms and all the ways to deal with this stuff, right? Nowadays, no one picks up a book and is this is radical, this form is radical, right? We understand what they are, how they work. We sort of understand how ideas proliferate in that manner, but this is different. And so I really don't know. That's a bit of a punt, but I think time is always going to be, a factor here, and that these things, we always sort of learn the norms and how to integrate them into our lives. The problem is that we are layering things on very quickly, right? And there's this guy who runs a generative AI company who I was doing some reporting and talking to recently, and he was just yeah, man, this election is super poorly timed, because all this stuff has just come in the past, year and a half.
Yeah. And
it's just if the election were, in 2025, maybe there would just be there'd be some more norms around how to use these tools. So I don't know. I think it's going to be kind of chaotic, but I think what's really important to remember is that just because certain tools exist, certain things exist, doesn't mean that a conspiracy theory around it, or that everything's going to latch. You really do need to create the right conditions, and the story needs to be right, and the personalities need to be right, the institutions need to be right.
The idea of the institutions being right, especially when it comes to Kate Middleton and the monarchy, is really striking for me, because that's, of course, an institution that people have been attaching all kinds of conspiracy theories to for millennia. That's not a thing that we invented in the 2020s or the 2010s. There's a long sort of history of this.
I have this one thing that I didn't get to fit into my piece that I think is really key here is so much of why this is a big viral moment, and why people are so interested, why people I'm not really a royal watcher or anything, but I've been kind of drawn into just sort of the online conversation around this, and it sort of feels like this wild, implausible story to me. And I think why so many people are pulled in that way, outsiders, is because what this is a story of is this sort of fundamental tale of the internet, which is big institutions and people with control losing control to sort of this larger networked mass, right? This is the royal family is a group that knows how to control the narrative, right? That has cozy relationships, that cultivates, who gets to tell their story and how they tell it, and how they get to present themselves to the world. And it's all so carefully cultivated over, centuries. And what you're seeing now is they're responding to internet gossip, right? Which is it's kind of crazy. And we're watching them try to, distinguish this fire and only, inflame it even more. And I think that is a little bit of why people are so fascinated by this, because it really is that story of that power struggle. I think of it a little bit just a tiny bit like the GameStop stuff that happened.
Yeah.
Where it's like you have, these financial institutions and big companies and the stock market and
Wall
investors.
Street's like, this stock is going to do so badly. And then regular people.
You have all these regular people being like, let me hit the chaos button and you'll see what happens. And I think you're seeing something here, right? Where like, the Kensington Palace is like, okay, fine, we're going to put out this, this photo or whatever. And the internet's like, no, like we're going to do our True Detective corkstring board thing. And you're going to, see, you're going to be put on your back foot. So I think that is the intrigue that we're seeing with this. Like, that's why this story keeps going, is because it's fundamentally a story about an institution that had control, grappling with the fact that they don't have control.
Charlie, I appreciate you being here. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, man. Always great to talk to you.
You bet. Charlie Warzel writes for The Atlantic. He was in Naples, Florida. And check out his newsletter. It is called Galaxy Brain.
We'll do it all. Everything on our own.
I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, when you hear this song, when you hear Chasing Cars by Snow Patrol, what is it that you picture? Are you crying, first of all? Is it a young Katherine Heigl crying in a prom dress? If that's what you picture, then I think it's fair to say that you're probably a Grey's Anatomy fan. My guess is Grey's Anatomy, either intimately or passively. My guess is you already know the show has followed the exciting and harrowing and yes, from time to time, occasionally sexy escapades of doctors at a hospital in Seattle for more than 400 episodes. It is the longest running medical drama on American television. And tonight, this very night, it premieres its 20th season. That is genuinely astonishing to me. Here to talk about the legacy of Meredith Grey and everything that's gone down over the last 2 decades at Grey Sloan Memorial are Emily Longeretta and Sarah Hunter Simanson. Emily, Sarah Hunter, it's a beautiful day to talk about Grey's. How y'all doing?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Hey, I'm happy to do this. I'm so excited. It feels improbable to me, Emily, that this show has been on the air since 2005 because I refuse to believe that I have endured around something that has existed for 20 years. I don't want to accept that, and I will not accept that. But let's just talk about the idea of 20 seasons into this show. Why is it still so popular, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's really hard to imagine a show that's been on for 20 seasons, especially in the landscape we are now with TV. But I think this show works because it's a perfect mix for a procedural with stories about real people, stories about healing, these people that can really connect to not only the cases each week, but the doctors, the interns, the nurses, the residents, every single person on there. It's all about connection. It's all about these characters that Shonda Rhimes created that every single person watching can connect to in one way or another.
It's incredible to look back, Sarah Hunter, and think when she was creating Grey's Anatomy, Shonda Rhimes, this was the very first show that she, created by herself, and now she's got Shondaland, this entire massive empire. She's created all these other shows, Private Practice, Bridgerton, How to Get Away with Murder. The list goes on in terms of the empire that she's created. Do you think it was obvious to us back then that this is a show that's going to go on to found an empire?
So I don't know if it was obvious when they were debuting, but I think as soon as the first few episodes came out, it became clear that this was something special, and the amount of people watching surpassed what anyone thought it would be.
Yeah.
And so I think, and then immediately when you have the combination of these imperfect but very strong female characters, I think that is where Shonda shines, and that's in all of her shows.
I like you describing the characters in How to Get Away with Murder as imperfect, but because I'm like, those people, I think we might make an exception for those people in those shows, in terms of describing them that way. But let's get back to Grey's. Sarah Hunter, you've talked to the fan base quite a bit. The fan base, the dedicated, loyal fan base of Grey's. How would you describe this fan base that's stuck around the show for 20 seasons?
So what I think makes it so interesting is it's so multi-generational. And I've been working on a piece where I've interviewed people all over the world, all different ages. And you have the fans like me who've been there since the beginning. And the parents above us who've been there since the beginning.
Yeah.
But then you also have Gen Z who started watching on Netflix and binged it and have caught up, and now they're watching in real time. And so I think that's what's so unique when you have a show that's gone on this long, is fans can watch at their own pace. You have people who are keeping up. Not that many people watch every Thursday anymore.
Yeah.
But a lot of people watch the next day on Hulu, or when the season drops on Netflix, and now it's all on Hulu. So you can watch it in more ways.
Emily, I tell myself a story about Grey's that is not entirely correct, which is that I say out loud, I'm not someone who watches Grey's Anatomy. But it's not true, because every time that it's on, I don't leave the room. Like, there's something sort of transfixing about someone's relationship to Grey's. So can you just talk a little bit about the anatomy of the ways that Grey's kind of like takes a hold on you, you know, even when you don't even necessarily think of yourself as someone who's like, oh, I'm a fan of the show. I'm actively a participant in the show.
Yeah, 100%. I think it kind of goes back to what Sarah Hunter was saying about how these strong female characters who are imperfect and real, they're very, very realistic, draw you in. I mean, from the relationships that they have, like you mentioned in your intro, that's sometimes a bit sexy. Shonda has a very easy way of doing that makes it look very, very good. But I think it's also about this escapism that every procedural really has, that again, it takes you out of your own life for a little while, allows you to look at a lot of people who are very pretty, let's be honest, and are also really connecting with each other, and mixing in sometimes a little bit crazy storylines that also kind of make you giggle and laugh through the days. We have to say it. Come on, it's Grey's Anatomy. We have to be honest here.
I was going to say, like, I feel like in the later seasons, it's the show's kind of become known for those crazy storylines. We're going to talk about those in just a second. But Sarah Hunter, we should say, like, the ways that these episodes have unfolded have left a real mark on pop culture. There's a lot of quotable lines, but maybe no more quotables than this one.
Don't get on any little tiny planes that can crash, or stick your hand in a body cavity that has a bomb in it, or offer your life to a gunman. Don't do that. You're my person.
So that's a bit of Canada's own Sandra Oh in season 10. She's saying goodbye as Christina Yang to her best friend Meredith Grey. Sarah Hunter, when you think about these relationships and this show's portrayal of friendships between women, how is it different from other shows on TV at the time?
So I think it goes back to that imperfection and to having these characters who are ambitious. They support each other in what they want, and they also are there when things go wrong. And so it's like when Sandra Oh says, "You're my person."
Yeah.
I mean, you also, like, one of the most vivid images to me is when Meredith's cutting her out of her wedding dress. And I think that became like the pinnacle of female friendship at that time. And you see that through the seasons, whether it's escaping a wedding with Slurpees, which has happened on the show before, or other, like, there's just so many moments like that. And I think that vernacular is so much a part of female friendships now. Even when I was interviewing the Gen Z person for an article, she still calls her best friend her Christina. And I think that is a legacy.
Yeah. I should say, if folks are just joining us, my name is Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. And tonight is the premiere of the 20th season of Grey's Anatomy. So we're talking about the show and how it's lasted so long and the ways it is engaged with so many different aspects of culture. Sarah Hunter, I would say, like, a hallmark of Grey's has been its willingness to just tackle social issues and just name them when a lot of other shows would be so uncomfortable around doing that. Grey's sort of builds a lot of its episodes specifically around certain social issues. One of the most memorable episodes was a season 15 episode, and in that episode, you know, the team at Grey Sloan helps a patient complete a rape kit. Could you tell us a little bit about the impact of that episode? Because I think that episode changed a lot of people's perspectives of, like, what happens when you have to go to the hospital for that.
So I think the context around that episode is really important. It was partially inspired after the Kavanaugh hearings. And so they were struggling with what consent means and how do we craft an episode around consent. And the showrunner at the time, Krista Vernoff, talked a lot about this in interviews and how they wanted to make this episode about consent. Camilla Luddington, who plays Jo, actually happened to call her and say that that episode is the origin story for Jo as well. And you find out that she was the product of rape, and that was her idea. And this all happened while they're listening to the Kavanaugh hearings. And So I think that was a really good example of an episode that showed step by step what it looks like when someone's raped, what it looks like to go through a rape kit. I mean, after in the hospital setting, there's this very powerful scene where the hallway's filled with women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of the people in that hallway were people affiliated with the show, not cast members, but crew members, executive producers.
Oh, wow.
And Shonda fought really hard to keep that in because they didn't want it to be as specific as it was and to show like the actual swabbing with Q-tips and everything. And I think because it was all about consent, you have Joe's origin story, you have that, and the other storyline was Miranda's son was dating for the first time, and there's this really powerful scene at the end of the episode where they talk about consent with dating.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that they tied it together, I think sometimes Grey's is far from perfect when it comes to these issue-driven storylines, and sometimes it feels really preachy. Pompeo's even called it out for being preachy sometimes. But I think this episode's one that at the time was powerful, especially given the context. But when you fast forward 5 years, I think it just becomes even more powerful.
Yeah.
And that's not the case with every issue-driven episode they've done. But I think overall, when it comes to women's issues, the show's been really strong.
Yeah, I think there's something really compelling to me about that idea. First of all, the idea that your star, Ellen Pompeo, could even criticize the show for taking this approach and still have the show continue to sort of take this approach. You don't get that anywhere else in television, I don't think. But Emily, the show has always kind of been progressive about a lot of the issues that it touches. I'm thinking here about, portrayal of same-sex relationships, of abortion, of trauma. But on the flip side, it often does get criticized for taking on these like really big, complex things. And it tries to handle them. I mean, it's an episodic structure. It's like, a thing is meant to be resolved at the end of the episode. And that's not really how social issues work. Has Grey's always gotten it right, do you think?
I mean, definitely not. I think it's hard to think of any show. I mean, it's impossible to say any show that's been on the air for 20 seasons, for almost 2 decades, has gotten every storyline right. And there definitely has been a lot of criticisms around some of the specific episodes they've done. Specifically, I mean, I think the COVID season, for example, a lot of people really found it in a great way because they dove in head first, but other people kind of felt that because the show is supposed to be escapism, it's not exactly what they wanted to see. So I think it's really hard to make everybody happy. And Shonda has done a really good job of, for the most part, tackling these things head on. And there are some really, really serious topics that end up kind of getting a little bit less serious because it's a procedural. This is entertainment. This isn't a docuseries. So I think people kind of need to get reminded that sometimes when an issue gets brought up, or sometimes an illness or something gets brought up and there's no backstory, people get very frustrated with a character. I always think of like Bailey getting diagnosed with OCD out of nowhere when we've seen her for so many years, and then this came out and people don't know about it. Things like that kind of don't seem to really fully make sense, and the fans really jump on the criticism train on. But I think it's really tough to continue to do that when a show that's been on for 2 decades.
But I think like what I like about it is that when a show has been on for this long, it can create this conversation because you've had this long attachment to these characters. I can't believe it, but today, 20th season of Grey's Anatomy begins. Emily, Sarah Hunter, I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much for your time. This has been great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, my pleasure. Sarah Hunter Simanson is a freelance writer who contributes to HuffPost's Culture and Arts section. She's in Memphis, Tennessee. And in Los Angeles, Emily Longeretta is a senior TV features editor at Variety. And that is it for the podcast today. Listen, remember, you can listen to any episode of the show anytime you like, wherever you get your podcasts. If you end up watching the 20th season of Grey's Anatomy, can you, tweet me or Instagram me? I want to know how you're processing the show 20 seasons in. We are on Instagram at Commotion CBC. My name is Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. I'm going to be here tomorrow. If you're going to be here, I'd love to see you then.